The peace broker arrived on the wrong shuttle. This was not a metaphor. Marsh Calloway of the Human Diplomatic Corps had booked passage on a military transport, the approved route, the one vetted by the East Compact's Security Directorate, the one that would have delivered him to Compound Reach's formal reception bay, where the honor guard and the vice-executor and the full apparatus of a state reception were waiting. Instead, due to a scheduling error that he later described as fundamentally my fault, I misread the manifest. He arrived 3 hours early on a supply shuttle, unescorted, carrying a canvas satchel and wearing a jacket with a coffee stain on the left lapel. The security checkpoint at the service bay had not been briefed to expect a human diplomat. The duty officer, facing a species she had never encountered in person, defaulted to the universal protocol for unexpected arrivals. She asked him to state his name, his purpose, and to wait. He stated his name. He stated his purpose. He sat down on a cargo crate and read a book for 2 hours and 40 minutes until someone came to collect him, at which point he apologized for the inconvenience, asked the duty officer her name, and remembered it, which she mentioned later in a way that her colleagues found disproportionately affecting. This was, Vale-Uras would eventually understand, completely characteristic. They said the war between the Sylvari East Compact and the Sylvari West Dominion had lasted so long that no living soldier remembered how it began. The historians disagreed on the exact year. The soldiers did not care. The war was the war, it was the weather, the gravity, the shared assumption underlying every breath they took in uniform. You fought because you were Sylvari and Sylvari fought. The question of why had been buried so deep beneath centuries of accumulated grievance that digging for it felt indecent, almost sacrilegious. Commander Vale-Uras of the East Compact's 3rd Orbital Fleet had been born into this weather. She had learned to walk in the corridors of a warship. She had learned to count using body tallies from her mother's last engagement. She had 23 confirmed kills before her 22nd year, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could fix, because the weariness was not in her body. It was in the part of her that still remembered asking once at age 7 why they were fighting, and receiving only a look that told her the question itself was the problem. She was 31 when the High Council summoned her to Compound Reach. The briefing was short. An alien species, the humans, had made contact 7 months prior. Small, bilaterally symmetrical, embarrassingly fragile, with a lifespan that made even junior Sylvari recruits seem ancient. They had no interstellar military presence of consequence. Their technology was at least 2 centuries behind the Compact's equivalent. They were, in the Council's precise language, beneath the threshold of strategic consideration. What they did have was a proposal. The human delegation has petitioned both the East Compact and the West Dominion, the Council vice-executor said. She was old, her crest faded to white, her hands steady in the way that very old soldiers' hands were steady, not from strength, but from having stopped caring what they held. They proposed to act as neutral third parties in a preliminary ceasefire negotiation. They cite their technological inferiority as a credential. The argument being that a species with nothing to gain from either side's victory cannot be accused of strategic alignment. They're correct that they have nothing to gain, Vale-Uras said. They also have nothing to offer. Their ambassador disagrees. The vice-executor slid a data slate across the briefing table. His name is Marsh Calloway. He was, before this, a civil engineer. He builds things, infrastructure, water systems. He has spent the last 4 years volunteering in conflict zones on his own world. He is 34 years old, which makes him elderly by human standards, and he speaks 12 languages, none of which are ours, though he has been studying Sylvari Common for 6 months and is reportedly functional. She paused. The West Dominion has already agreed to the proposal, conditionally. The condition is that the East Compact also agrees. Vale-Uras looked at the image on the slate. He was unremarkable by any standard she would have applied. Brown skin, dark hair, a broad face with the kind of expression that suggested he had never quite learned to hide what he was thinking. He looked earnest. It was the only word for it. He had the eyes of someone who genuinely believed the thing they were saying. The proposal includes a secondary clause, the vice executor said. The ambassador has offered, as a gesture of good faith, his words, to formalize the diplomatic relationship between humanity and the East Compact through a recognized bond under our legal framework, our equivalent of a treaty marriage. He is aware of the implications. He made the offer himself. Our legal scholars confirm it would be binding. Vale looked up from the slate. He's offering to marry into the compact. Into our military command specifically. He identified you by name. He said, and I am quoting directly, Commander Vale has the most consistent record of mission completion under adverse conditions in either fleet. That means she understands costs. Someone who understands costs might be willing to consider an alternative to paying them forever. There was a long silence in the briefing room. He researched us, Vale said. Extensively. She looked at the image again. The earnest eyes, the open face, the expression of a man who had decided to walk into the middle of a centuries-old war with no weapons and a 6-month crash course in someone else's language, because he had apparently decided it was worth trying. He's either very brave or very stupid, she said. In our experience, the vice executor said, with humans the distinction is often difficult to draw. The wedding was a political ceremony. Both of them understood this. What Vale had not expected was that Marsh Calloway would show up to it having learned, in the 3 weeks between her agreement and the ceremony, enough of the formal Solvari marriage liturgy to respond in kind, haltingly, with an accent that made the officiating priest visibly wince, but correctly. He had also, apparently, spent those 3 weeks reading everything publicly available about Solvari military customs, compact law, and the specific traditions of her clan line. You didn't have to do that, she told him afterward, when the ceremony was done and they stood together at the edge of the reception hall's viewport, the stars spread out below them like scattered salt. I know, he said. He had a way of pausing before he spoke, not from uncertainty but as if he were genuinely considering his words. But you were agreeing to something significant. The least I could do was show up having tried. You could have hired a translator. I did hire a translator. The translator is what I used to learn the words. He looked at the stars. I build water systems. When you build something that people are going to depend on, you don't outsource the understanding. You have to know how it works yourself. Even if someone else is better at the technical parts than you. Studied him. He was small by her standards. The top of his head barely reached her shoulder. He stood with the loose posture of someone who had spent years in low-gravity environments, slightly forward, weight on the balls of his feet as if ready to move in any direction. He did not seem frightened of her. That was the thing that struck her most. Most species, meeting a fully decorated Solvari combat commander for the first time, registered some degree of fear, even when they tried to hide it. Marsh Calloway looked at her with simple, direct attention, the way you looked at a problem you were trying to understand. This is going to be very difficult, she said. I know, he said again. Most things worth doing are. He glanced sideways at her. I also know you think this isn't going to work. That's fine. You don't have to believe it'll work. You just have to give it the same honest effort you'd give any other mission. She did not answer, but she did not look away from the stars either. In the first week of their marriage, formal, political, both of them understanding this, he asked her to teach him something. Anything, he said, something you know that you don't think I'd know. She thought about it. She taught him the Solvari card game Keth Voren, which was played with a deck of 112 tiles and took approximately 4 hours to complete a single round. She expected him to find it tedious. He found it interesting. He asked her by the 3rd round, why the scoring system was weighted the way it was, and she explained the historical context. The game had originated as a training simulation for fleet resource allocation, and he said, "Oh, so it's actually a negotiation tool," and started playing it completely differently. He beat her on the fourth round. "You're not supposed to be able to do that," she said. "I think I got lucky," he said. She looked at the tiles. He had not gotten lucky. He had identified the structural logic of the game's resource economy and applied it with a consistency that she, who had been playing for 20 years, had never brought to it because she had always played it as combat simulation rather than resource allocation modeling. He had looked at the same game and seen a different game inside it. "You build things," she said. "Yes. You see structural systems even in things that aren't construction." He considered this. "I see how things connect," he said. "That's most of what engineering is. How does this connect to that? What happens to the system if this changes? What's load-bearing?" He picked up a tile. "War is a system. It has load-bearing elements, things that hold it up. If you change those things, the structure changes." "Most people would call that naive," she said. "Most people haven't built a water system for a community that had been in a land dispute with its neighbor for 40 years, he said. Once both communities were sharing infrastructure, the land dispute changed character completely. It didn't end immediately, but the structure changed. He set the tile down. Systems can be designed or they can be changed. It's the same principle. She looked at him. He was perfectly serious. He was always perfectly serious when he talked about his work, not heavy, not grandiose, just the complete absence of irony that you found in people who had decided what they were doing with their lives and had made their peace with that decision. "Another round," she said. He smiled. "Only if you explain the historical context of the scoring variants. I think I've been playing the garrison version. I want to know about the fleet command version." The first negotiation session between the East Compact and the West Dominion was held aboard a neutral platform, a decommissioned research station in unclaimed space, equidistant from both fleets. Vale commanded the Compact's escort squadron. The Dominion squadron commander was a veteran named Prethsal, whom Vale had fought 3 times, and who had the specific category of respect for her that soldiers developed for enemies they had failed to kill. Marsh Calloway walked into the negotiation chamber ahead of both of them. He was carrying a battered canvas satchel and wearing his one good suit, which Vale had learned was his equivalent of formal dress. He had insisted on setting up the room himself the night before, the table arrangement, the chair heights, the small details that made a room feel neutral rather than hostile. He had asked Vale which side of the room the Compact delegation preferred, and then deliberately placed himself 3 degrees off-center to prevent either side from feeling he was leaning. He spent 4 hours on the chairs, Vale told Prethsal, in the corridor outside, while they waited for the session to begin. It was not the kind of thing she would normally say to a Dominion officer, but there was something about the situation that made normal rules feel temporarily suspended. "He asked our delegation the same question about the chairs," Prethsal said. She was quiet for a moment. "He asked it separately, not in a joint session, so neither side would know the other was consulted. So both sides would feel heard, without either side knowing the other had been given the same consideration." Prethsal's expression was something between grudging and curious. "It's a small thing." "It's not a small thing," Vale said. "It's the entire methodology in miniature." The first session ran for 7 hours. Marsh did not propose anything in that first session. He asked questions. He asked them in the careful, unhurried way of someone who already knew the technical answer but needed the other person to arrive at it themselves. He asked East Compact officials what they needed for their civilian population, centers that they were currently unable to provide due to resource allocation in the war. He asked West Dominion officials the same question. He wrote the answers down on actual paper, with an actual pen, which both delegations found so disarmingly archaic that it slightly diffused the hostility in the room. At the end of the 7 hours, he read both lists back aloud. The overlap was substantial. "This is what you're both fighting over," he said, "and this is what the fighting is preventing you from having. I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly before I say anything else." He looked at the paper. "I think I do. We'll pick this up tomorrow." He closed his notebook and left. Vieilleuras found him that evening in the station's observation bay, sitting on the floor with his back against the viewport, eating something from a small container that smelled strongly of spices. He looked up when she came in and held the container out toward her, which she had learned was a human gesture of sharing. "How do you think it went?" he asked. "You didn't propose anything." "No, not yet." "Then how do you measure success?" He considered this. "Did anyone leave the room early?" "No." "Did anyone say anything that would have been impossible to unsay?" "No." "Did both sides learn something today about what the other side actually needs, even if they don't know they learned it yet?" She thought about it. "Probably." "Then it went well." He took another bite. "The hardest part of ending a conflict isn't finding the solution. Both sides usually know what the solution looks like. The hardest part is making them sit in the same room long enough and calmly enough to remember that they know." She sat down across from him, which required folding her legs in a way that she was not accustomed to. "You've done this before." On a much smaller scale, a watershed dispute between two farming communities, a resource allocation fight between two city districts. He paused. "Nothing with fleets, nothing with this much history." "Does that worry you?" "Yes," he said simply, "but I worry about things that I can actually influence. The things I can't influence I try to file separately." He tapped his temple. "Different drawer." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a very strange creature," she said. "So I've been told." He passed her the container. "Try some, it's better than it smells." 3 weeks into the negotiations, the bombing happened. West Dominion hardliners, officers loyal to an admiral named Coram, who had spent 40 years accumulating both victories and the conviction that victory was the only meaningful form of peace, attacked a supply convoy in the neutral corridor. 11 East Compact soldiers died. The negotiating framework nearly died with them. Vieilleuras had her squadron ready to move within 20 minutes of receiving word. She was in the command chair, coordinates locked, when Marsh came into the combat bridge at a run. "Don't," he said. 11 of our people are dead." "I know." He was out of breath. He had run from the communications bay. "I know, and whoever ordered that attack wants you to respond. They want you to give the Dominion moderates a reason to lose their argument at home. They want this to break down." He put his hand on the edge of the navigation console, not grabbing anything, just putting himself physically in her line of sight. Coram attacked the convoy, not the Dominion. Coram. There's a difference, and you know there's a difference. The Dominion is responsible for its officers. Yes, and I'm asking you to let the Dominion moderates make that case from a position where they still have credibility. If you strike now, Coram wins, not the Dominion. Coram specifically. He held her gaze. "You know I'm right. My people are dead." "I know." His voice was quiet. It did not flinch. "I know they are. I'm asking you to make their deaths mean something by not letting them become the pretext for ending the one process that might eventually mean nobody else has to die the same way." He paused. "It's an ugly ask. I know it's ugly. I'm asking it anyway." The bridge was completely silent. Every officer on station was watching Vieilleuras. She thought about the 7-year-old who had asked why and been told the question was the problem. She thought about 23 kill tallies on a child's bedroom wall. She thought about what it would mean to be right and winning and still adding to the list. "Stand down," she said. "Hold position." The bridge exhaled. Marsh left without saying anything else. He understood that there were moments that did not require a response. What happened next was not discovered until Vale received an intelligence report 4 days later. In the 48 hours following the convoy attack, Marsh Calloway had sent 12 separate encrypted communications to Dominion Council members, to neutral station administrators, to 2 retired Solvari generals who retained significant influence with their respective factions, and to a network of independent observers that he had apparently been quietly assembling for 6 months before the negotiations even began. A skeleton framework of contacts on both sides, people who wanted an end to the war and had no official channel through which to say so. He had not told her. She found him in the communication bay and waited until the operator on duty made a reason to leave. "You were running a network," she said. "Yes. Before you arrived here. Before the negotiations started." "Yes." He met her eyes. "I identified it as necessary groundwork. Negotiations at the official level fail if there's no supporting structure underneath. You need people at every level who are invested in the outcome." He paused. "I should have told you." "You should have told me." "I was concerned that if either delegation knew a network existed, they would feel pressure to monitor it, and that would compromise the people in it." He did not look away from her. "Some of those people could be court-martialed for participating. I was trying to protect them." "And me, were you protecting me?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want you to have to choose between knowing and protecting the network. That wasn't fair to you. I understand if you're angry." She was. She also understood his reasoning with a clarity that made the anger feel complicated. "Don't do it again," she said. "Whatever you're doing, whatever you think I can't know, tell me. I'll tell you what I can and can't act on. We'll figure it out together." He nodded. "All right." "How many people?" 47 at last count. 31 Dominion, 16 Compact, plus 8 Independents. He pulled out his notebook. "I can show you the structure if you want." She sat down. "Show me." The antimatter weapon changed everything. Intelligence confirmed it 2 months into the negotiation process. Admiral Fetzcorum had not merely been obstructing peace talks, he had been actively clearing the board. The weapon, a prototype drive core repurposed into a directed annihilation system, large enough to render a planetary system uninhabitable, was installed aboard a modified war platform in the outer ring of contested space. It was not large enough to win a war. It was large enough to commit an atrocity of sufficient scale that neither side could negotiate afterward without it defining every subsequent conversation. Its intended target was Reach Station, the neutral platform where the negotiations were happening. The research confirmed it. The timing window was 72 hours. Vale called a joint emergency session with Prethsol. They had exactly enough combined force to get a squadron to the outer ring. They did not have enough force to guarantee destroying the platform before the weapon could be armed, because Fetzcorum's personal fleet was positioned in direct intercept. "Mutual annihilation," Prethsol said. She was looking at the tactical display with the expression of someone calculating exactly how much it would cost to win and finding the number unacceptable. "Both our squadrons destroyed. The platform possibly destroyed, possibly not. He positioned himself well." "He knew we'd come," Vale said. "He's been doing this for 40 years. Of course he knew." Marsh was at the back of the room. He had been quiet since the intelligence briefing. That was unusual for him. He was usually the one asking questions, filing things away, finding angles. The silence was its own signal. "There's another approach," he said. Both commanders looked at him. "The weapon is a repurposed drive core," he said. He had his notebook out and he had been writing in it, small quick notations, the way he always did when he was working through a problem. A drive core is designed to modulate its own output based on the mass and conductivity of the materials around it. It has to function safely, which means there are physical interfaces, access points, built into the design for calibration and emergency shutdown. He paused. A Solvari technician can't use them during active operation because the electromagnetic environment interferes with Solvari neural tissue above a certain threshold. The silence in the room changed quality. "You're not Solvari," Prethsal said. "No, human nervous systems operate on different frequencies. The interference threshold is significantly higher for us." He looked up from the notebook. "I spent 3 years working with repurposed drive cores in low-gravity construction environments. The shutdown sequence is the same regardless of what the core has been configured to do. The hardware hasn't changed." "The platform is defended," Valeura said. Her voice was completely flat. "Yes, you need to run a sufficient distraction to pull the outer defense grid, which you can do. Your combined squadrons are enough for that. Not enough to destroy the platform before it fires, but enough to pull the perimeter." He closed the notebook. "I'd go in on a small courier vessel, low signature. The window during the distraction should be enough to get me to the access point." "Should be," Valeura said. "Should be," he agreed. "You'd be inside the electromagnetic field." "Yes." "Which, even at the threshold safe for humans, would." "I know what it would do," he said quietly. "I've read the reports." She looked at him. He was watching her with the same direct, open attention he always brought to things, the look of a man who had calculated the costs and was not pretending they were smaller than they were. No performance of bravery, no denial, just a person who had looked at what the situation required and was telling her what he was prepared to do. "There has to be another option," she said. "If there is, tell me." "I've been looking for one for the last hour." He spread his hands. "The weapon fires in 68 hours. If it fires, the negotiations end, probably permanently. Everything everyone in this room has done for the last 2 months ends. Everyone in Reach Station dies." He looked at Prethsal. "Everyone in your delegation, your people." He looked back at Valeura's. "Our people." "Our people." He said it so naturally. "Our." "We leave in 4 hours," Valeura said. "You have 4 hours to find me a better option. If you find one, we use it. If you don't," she stopped. "If you don't, we do this your way." He nodded and left. She sat in the empty briefing room for a long time after everyone else had filed out, looking at the tactical display. Then she followed him. He was in the equipment bay, running diagnostics on the courier vessel's access systems. He did not look up when she came in. "I'm not going to tell you not to do it," she said. "I know. I'm going to tell you that if you do it, you need to come back." He looked up then. Something in his expression shifted, not breaking exactly, but softening at the edges. "I'm going to do my best," he said. "That's not what I said." "No," he set down the diagnostic tool. "It's the best I can promise." She was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down on the equipment crate beside him, and they stayed there for a while, not saying anything, which she had learned was something humans could do, hold silence together in a way that was not absence but presence. She had not known that was a thing that could be done. She was finding that there were quite a lot of things she had not known could be done until he had done them in front of her. The attack on Fetscorum's outer perimeter began at 300 station time. 2 combined squadrons hit the defense grid from 3 angles simultaneously, drawing the perimeter defense inward. It was not enough force to penetrate to the platform. It was not supposed to be. It was enough noise and enough threat that the defense grid had to respond. And in the 6 minutes of the response window, the courier vessel slipped through on a low-power trajectory, running silent, hull radiating the same temperature as the debris field that Valeura's forward elements had deliberately created as cover. She tracked it on the secondary display. A dot of light, moving very slowly, in the wrong direction from every other light on the board. The battle was loud. Fetzcorum's fleet engaged harder than expected. He had known a combined force was coming, but the scale of his response suggested he had not anticipated how thoroughly the two factions were cooperating. Something in the tactical calculus had surprised him. Valeura's kept one part of her attention on the engagement, and the other part on the small light moving slowly through the debris field. The light stopped. She held her breath. The minutes passed. The battle continued to rage across the outer grid. 3 compact fighters lost, 2 Dominion. Fetzcorum was pulling reserves forward, concentrating force, trying to punch through to the negotiation platform. He had realized too late that the combined attack was not an attempt to destroy his weapon, but a distraction for something else, and now he was trying to find out what. The light on the secondary display did not move. 14 minutes, 15. The courier vessel was in the electromagnetic envelope of the weapon platform now. Even from this distance, on her instruments, she could see the field readings spiking in the outer ring. Prethsal's voice came over the command channel. He's been in there 15 minutes. I know. The field strength at the access point would be. I know, Valeura said. Silence on the channel. 17 minutes. The dot still did not move, and then every instrument on the board registered a cascade event from the outer ring. Not an explosion, a shutdown. The weapon's drive core collapsed inward on itself, safely controlled, the way a properly executed emergency shutdown worked, releasing the stored charge into a directed dispersal pattern that burned off harmlessly into space. The weapon platform was intact. The weapon was not. The battle continued for 4 more minutes, then stopped, because Fetzcorum's ship stopped firing. Because the weapon was gone, and without it, the tactical logic of his position had evaporated, and he had enough experience to recognize a finished hand. Valeura's was watching the dot on the secondary display. It moved. She met the courier vessel at the docking ring personally. She did not wait for the medical team. She was standing at the hatch when it opened. Marsh Calloway came out of the hatch on his own feet. This was notable because the electromagnetic exposure at the access point, sustained for 17 minutes at the field strength necessary to operate the shutdown sequence, should have made standing up independently a significant physiological challenge. He was gray-faced and moving like someone navigating through pain, one hand on the corridor wall, but he was upright and he was walking and his eyes were open. He saw her and stopped. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. I told you to come back, she said. I did come back. You look terrible. I feel terrible. He managed something that was not quite a smile. But the core's cold. I checked the readings on the way out. He held up the diagnostic tool he was still carrying, had carried out of the access point apparently, through the electromagnetic field, through the dispersal event, through 17 minutes of what the medical team, arriving behind her, was already beginning to assess with expressions suggesting they had not anticipated this particular outcome. It's completely inert. It'll need to be physically removed, but it can't fire. She looked at the diagnostic tool, then she looked at him. You brought the tool, she said. Force of habit. He looked at it as well, as if slightly surprised to find it in his hand. I always finish the calibration before I leave the site. She took the tool out of his hand, very gently, and passed it to the nearest medic. Then she did something she had not planned and did not think about before doing it. She put her hand on his face, briefly, in the Solvari gesture, reserved for people who had done something at cost to themselves, and were not going to hear the formal acknowledgement they deserved. He was quiet under her hand. He understood what the gesture meant. She had explained the gesture to him once, months ago, in the same way she had explained other customs matter-of-factly, because he always asked and she had stopped not answering. The medical team is going to be insufferable about the next few days, he said. Yes. Can I have my notebook back before they take my jacket? No. I have important notes in there. No, she said again, and something in the texture of the word was different from any way she had said it to him before, which he noticed, because he noticed everything. He did not push the point. He let the medics take him, and she stood in the docking ring after he was gone and looked at the diagnostic tool that someone had set down on a nearby crate, and at the reading still on its display, confirming what he'd said. Cold, inert, finished. The aftermath of what happened in the outer ring took longer than the event itself, as aftermaths usually do. Fetz-Coram was removed from command by the West Dominion's own command council. Prethsol filed the motion, which passed unanimously, because Fetz-Coram had deployed a weapon of mass destruction without council authorization, and had come within a single human engineer's intervention of committing an atrocity that would have defined both factions for a generation. The moderates on both sides, who had been arguing against the hardliners for months, now had a very clear example of what hardline policies produced at their logical endpoint. The story of what Marsh Calloway had done spread, as these things spread, selectively and with embellishment. Some of what circulated was accurate, some was not. What was accurate? A human had walked into the electromagnetic envelope of a weapon designed to render planetary systems uninhabitable, shut it down manually from inside the active field, and then walked back out again carrying his tools. What was embellished? The field strength, the number of defense platforms he had supposedly slipped past, the time he had spent inside. By the time the story reached the outer frontier stations, it had taken on dimensions that bore only loose resemblance to the actual 17-minute maintenance operation aboard a courier vessel. But the emotional truth of the embellishments was accurate, which was the only part that mattered for what the story accomplished. Both East Compact and West Dominion soldiers were passing the story between themselves. A creature with a lifespan shorter than a Silvari's early career had walked into the center of their longest, oldest war with a diagnostic tool, and ended an immediate threat by physical and intellectual force alone, and then come back out and asked for his notebook. The Silvari word for this kind of act was not heroism. The Silvari word was closer to something like sufficiency, the quality of being exactly enough for the situation, no more and no less, with no performance attached. Sufficiency was what you hoped for in a veteran. It was rarely what you saw, because sufficiency required not caring how the act looked, only whether it worked. Marsh Calloway had achieved sufficiency. The soldiers knew it when they heard the story, even across factional lines. Especially across factional lines. Someone in the Third Compact Fleet started calling him something, and the name spread. The direct translation was clumsy in human speech. The closest equivalent was something like the one who walks quiet into the engine, which was both accurate and the kind of name that did not fit on a formal form. In informal usage it shortened to the engineer, but it was said with a different weight than the word usually carried. The negotiations resumed. They resumed on Reach Station, with the full delegations, 4 days after the Outer Ring incident. Marsh was present but not at the table. He was sitting in his usual chair at the back of the room, with his notebook, looking slightly more tired than usual and moving slightly more carefully, which Vale Uras was tracking from the corner of her attention while simultaneously representing the East Compact in the formal session. He was not supposed to be at the table. He was there as a facilitator. He said, when anyone asked, that facilitators did not sit at the table because sitting at the table made you a party, and parties had positions to defend, and defending positions was the opposite of what he was there to do. The session went for 9 hours. At the end of the 9 hours, both delegations had signed a preliminary ceasefire framework, not a peace treaty, but a binding agreement to halt active operations in the 3 primary contested corridors while a permanent framework was negotiated. It was a step. By the standards of a 200-year war, It was an enormous step. By the standards of what remained to be done, it was a beginning. When everyone else had left the room, Vale found Marsh at the viewport, the same posture as the night of their wedding, watching the stars. He had his notebook open, but he was not writing in it. He was just looking at the stars. She stood beside him. "I keep trying to figure out which one is Sol," he said. "I know I can't see it from here. But I keep looking." She did not say anything. "My father was a construction worker," he said. "His father was a farmer. His father before that built roads." He turned the notebook over in his hands. "We've been building things for as long as anyone kept records. Roads, bridges, water systems, things that work, things that help." He paused. "I don't know if this is going to hold, the ceasefire, the framework." He looked at her. "Do you think it'll hold?" She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about tactical assessments. She thought about the 47 members of his network, now openly acknowledged by both sides. She thought about Prethsol, who had filed the motion against Fett's quorum, and who had looked, in the briefing room, at Marsh Calloway's quiet explanation of what he was going to do and said nothing, because she recognized the quality of the act before it happened. She thought about the soldiers passing the story between themselves, east and west, across lines that had been absolute for 200 years. "I think it has a better chance than it did 2 months ago," she said. "That's an honest assessment. You asked for an honest assessment." He almost smiled. "I did." He closed the notebook. "I'll take it." He looked at the stars for a moment longer. "It's a start." The medical team, as predicted, was insufferable. Not individually. Each medic and physician who attended to Marsh in the days following the Outer Ring incident was professional, competent, and careful. Collectively, they conveyed, through the cumulative effect of many small expressions, that they found the situation extraordinary and wished to convey this at regular intervals. The extraordinary situation. A human had sustained electromagnetic field exposure that should, by all Solvari medical models, have produced severe neurological impairment. The human in question had instead walked out of the field under his own power, completed a maintenance checklist, and asked for his notebook. The medical team's models required updating, which they found scientifically exciting and also somewhat annoying, because they had been confident in those models. Marsh spent 3 days in the station's medical bay. He was not a good patient in the sense that he was compliant and restful. He was a good patient in the sense that he did exactly what the doctors asked, and immediately went back to reading the moment they stopped asking things. He read everything he could find on the long-term effects of field exposure on human physiology, which resulted in him asking his attending physician a series of questions that she found inconvenient to answer, because some of them were good questions that she did not yet have good answers for. He also, on the second day, asked Vale to bring him the treaty framework documents so he could continue working on the clause language for the resource-sharing provisions. She brought them. She did not mention to the medical staff that she had done this. On the third day, Prethsol visited him. Vale was present for this, because it was the kind of thing you watched. The Dominion Squadron commander who had fought Vale 3 times sitting at the bedside of the human who had, in a very real tactical sense, saved both their fleets from being the instrument of an atrocity. Prethsol was not demonstrative. She stood with her hands behind her back and looked at Marsh Calloway in the medical bay with the expression of someone adjusting a significant prior belief. "You brought your tools out," she said. "It seemed wasteful to leave them," he said. "They found you still running the calibration sequence when you came out of the field. The shutdown is only complete when the calibration sequence confirms 0 residual charge. Otherwise, you've just suppressed it, not ended it." He held up his left hand, which had the slight tremor that the medical staff was monitoring and expected to resolve within 2 weeks. "I should have used gloves. The calibration interface runs warm." Prethsol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, In the West Dominion, there is a word for a soldier who completes their mission and completes it correctly. The word is applied to very few people in any generation. "I'm not a soldier," Marsh said. "The word does not only apply to soldiers," Prethsal said. She paused. "It applies to anyone who knows exactly what is required, does exactly that and no more." She met his eyes. "I wanted you to know that word applies." She left. Marsh looked at Vale. "What's the word?" he asked. She told him. He wrote it in his notebook and underlined it. 8 months later, the preliminary ceasefire held. It held through 2 attempted provocations by Fet's Quorum's remaining loyalists in the Dominion. It held through a civilian incident in the second contested corridor that nearly broke it, and would have broken it except that Marsh's network, now fully operational, now known to both sides, now tacitly protected under the ceasefire framework, moved faster than the official channels, and had the relevant parties in communication within hours instead of days. It held through a change of administration in the East Compact Command Council, which had been the moment Vale had feared most, because the incoming administration had run on a harder line. The incoming council had its briefing on the status of negotiations. They read the reports. They looked at the ceasefire metrics, which showed a 43% reduction in casualties even in the contested corridors. They read the intelligence assessment on the antimatter weapon incident, which was comprehensive and did not minimize what would have happened if the outcome had been different. They approved continued participation in the negotiation framework. Marsh asked Vale that evening whether she had been worried. "Yes," she said. "But it worked out. This time." "This time," he was quiet. "There'll be a next time, there always is." "I know. You'll handle it." She looked at him. He was reading something. He was always reading something, filling gaps in his knowledge about Solvari law and custom and history with the same steady, methodical attention he brought to everything. He had, in the months since the Outer Ring incident, become fluent enough in Solvari Common that the formal register no longer made him stumble, and he had the habit of occasionally thinking out loud in it when he forgot she could hear him. "You're not worried," she said. He set down what he was reading. "I worry constantly," he said. "I just try not to let worry be the same thing as certainty." He picked up his notebook. "That's different. Worry is realistic. Certainty is just worry that's given up." She thought about this. Then she said, "My mother would have found you completely incomprehensible." "I get that a lot." She would have been right. "Also get that a lot." He looked up from the notebook. "Does that bother you?" She considered it, genuinely, the way she had learned to consider things in the months of watching him think carefully about questions before answering them. She considered what it had been like before he arrived, and what it was like now, and what the difference felt like from the inside. She thought about the 7-year-old with the question, and the look that said the question was the problem, and about what it felt like to have spent the last 8 months in the company of a person for whom the question was never the problem. The question was always the starting point. "No," she said, "it doesn't bother me." He nodded, as if this was not surprising but was still worth registering. Then he went back to reading. She went back to her own work. Through the viewport, the stars held their positions, as they always had. The same stars she had counted on deployment. The same stars her mother had navigated by. The same stars that had been there for the whole 200 years of the war, patient and unchanging, waiting for someone to look up from the fighting long enough to notice there were other things in the sky. There was a moment, between the ceasefire and the treaty, that Vale did not tell many people about, because the details of it were difficult to convey without making her sound as if she was exaggerating. Fet's Quorum, after his removal from command, had been held in a West Dominion detention facility pending formal tribunal. He had significant political support among hardline Dominion elements, and the tribunal had been slow, deliberately slow, by people who did not want to create a martyr, but also did not want to proceed without a complete evidentiary record. 8 months into the ceasefire, a small group of Fet's Quorum loyalists broke him out of detention. He came to Reach Station. Specifically, 3 ships, running false compact IDs, docked at the outer ring of Reach Station at 200. The security alert reached Vale Euras at 2:14. At 2:17, she was in the command bay. At 2:19, she received a second alert. Fet's Quorum was already in the station. He had come inside himself, 3 guards and himself. The Dominion hardliner who had held the old war together with sheer personal force for 4 decades had walked through a cargo airlock in a station he knew better than most of the people working it, and he was moving through the service corridors toward the negotiation hub. Vale Euras did not reach him first. Marsh did. She found out later that he had heard the alert on the secondary channel. He always monitored secondary channels, a habit that had developed during the negotiations and had been awake, because he was always awake at 200, which she had noted and found puzzling, until he explained that he did his best thinking in the hours that felt quiet. He had gone toward the sound of the alert rather than away from it, which was, she would later note, completely characteristic. He was standing in the service corridor when Fet's Quorum came around the corner. Fet's Quorum stopped. Marsh Calloway was wearing a shirt without a jacket, which meant the coffee stain was visible. He was carrying his notebook. He had not, as far as anyone could determine, gone looking for a weapon. He had gone looking for what was happening, which is a different thing. Fet's Quorum looked at him. Fet's Quorum was a Solvari commander of the old generation, large even by Solvari standards, with a military bearing that had not softened in the months of detention, and the specific quality of physical authority that decades of command produced. He looked at Marsh Calloway the way you looked at something unexpected that needed to be assessed. "You're the human," he said. "Yes," Marsh said. "You shut down the weapon." "Yes." Fet's Quorum studied him. His guards were positioned at the corridor junction. Marsh was standing between Fet's Quorum and the passage to the negotiation hub, not as a tactical position. He had no training in tactical positioning, but simply because he had come from that direction and stopped when he rounded the corner. "You know what I came here to do," Fet's Quorum said. "I have a reasonable inference," Marsh said. He held the notebook. He did not back up. "I'd like to offer an alternative." Fet's Quorum looked at the notebook. Something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly but recalibrating. He had expected when he came around the corner something specific. He had not expected this, whatever this was. "An alternative," he said. "Yes." Marsh opened the notebook. "I've been drafting a proposal for a Veterans Commission as part of the treaty framework. The idea is that senior officers from both sides would serve on a commission that reviews resource allocation in the former contested corridors, to make sure the ceasefire terms aren't being systematically disadvantaging the communities that were most affected by the fighting. Veterans have a different credibility on those questions than civilian administrators." He looked up. "A commission of that kind needs members who are credible to the hardline elements on both sides, not because those elements are right, because their cooperation makes the framework durable." He paused. "I think your involvement would make it significantly more durable." The corridor was completely still. "You're asking me to join the peace process," Fet's Quorum said. His voice was flat, the way things were flat when they were covering something more complex underneath. "I'm telling you there's a place in the peace process that needs someone with your specific credibility," Marsh said. "That's different from asking. I'm not asking, I'm informing." He closed the notebook. "I've been doing this work for over a year. I have found, consistently, that the people who were most committed to the old way are sometimes the ones who matter most to what comes next, because the people who weren't committed to the old way don't need convincing. They're already there. It's the people who were committed who carry the weight when they change." He met Fet's Quorum's eyes. You understand what's been lost in this war. You've been keeping accounts of it for 40 years. That's the kind of understanding you can't transfer. It either walks through the door of the peace process, or it stands outside it and undermines everything from there. Another long silence. You're not afraid of me, Fetscorum said. I'm afraid of quite a lot, Marsh said. But you came here to destroy something that took a great deal of work to build. I built most of it, so I'm more motivated right now than I am afraid. Vale Ura's security team arrived at the corridor junction at that moment. She arrived 30 seconds behind them. She assessed the situation in 1 second. Fetscorum, his 3 guards, Marsh standing between them and the hub, holding his notebook, not having moved. Fetscorum looked at Marsh Calloway for one more moment. Then he looked at the guards at the junction. Then he looked back. He said something in the Old West Dominion dialect that Marsh did not speak, and that Vale Ura's would not have expected to hear him say. It was the word for surrender, but the formal variant, the one used in ceremonies when a commander transferred authority, the one that meant not defeat but transition. He stood down. He was taken into custody. The security team handled it efficiently. His guards surrendered without incident. Marsh stood in the empty corridor after they were gone, looking at his notebook. When Vale Ura's came to stand beside him, he was writing something. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Adding the Veterans Commission to the treaty framework document," he said. "I wasn't sure the idea was ready, but I think it's ready." She looked at him for a long moment. She had seen a lot of things in 31 years of military service. She had not seen that. "You made that up," she said. "The Veterans Commission in the corridor." He looked up. "I made the conversation up. The idea's been in the notebook for 3 weeks. He showed her the page. There it was, the commission framework in his small, cramped handwriting, dated 6 weeks prior. I just hadn't found the right moment to propose it to the delegations yet. He closed the notebook. "Now I have." She thought about this. "You negotiated Fetscorum into standing down by offering him a role in the process he came here to destroy. I offered him a way out that was better than the way he came in with. People usually take the better option if you show them it exists and isn't humiliating." He paused. It helped that he spent 40 years being right about what the war cost. That made him the right person for the commission, which made the offer genuine instead of just tactical. Genuine offers are harder to refuse. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You're the most dangerous person I've ever met." He blinked. "I'm really not. You just talked a Solvari fleet admiral into a ceasefire with a notebook and a sentence about credibility." "I talked him into taking the available better option," he said. "That's different from being dangerous." He paused. "I think." She shook her head, but it was not the kind of headshake that meant disagreement. It was the kind that meant she had run out of the right words for the thing she was looking at. The full peace treaty was signed 14 months later. It was not a perfect treaty. No peace treaty ever was. There were clauses that both sides hated, territories left in uncomfortable ambiguity, resource agreements that would require renegotiation within a decade. Prethsal said, at the signing ceremony, that a treaty everyone equally disliked was usually the one that would stick, because it meant neither side had gotten everything they wanted, and both sides had gotten enough to live with. Marsh was present at the signing. He was seated in the back of the room, as always, with his notebook. He had been formally recognized by both the East Compact and the West Dominion for his role in the negotiations, which he had accepted with the same mild embarrassment he brought to all recognition. The expression of a person who thought the recognition was for the outcome, not the person, and found the distinction important even if nobody else did. After the ceremony, Vale Ura's found him outside the hall, in a service corridor, sitting against the wall with his notebook, writing furiously. She had learned to recognize the writing style. He was making notes for the debrief documentation he would file with the Human Diplomatic Corps, the lessons learned record, the methodology notes, the structural analysis of what had worked and why. Already working on the next one, she said. There are 17 active conflicts in this sector alone, he said, not looking up. Somebody's going to need to do something about them eventually. He finished a note. Might as well have good documentation. She sat down next to him on the floor. He did not seem surprised. She had started doing this, sitting on the floor with him, in corridors, in observation bays, in equipment holds, because he sat on the floor a great deal, and she had found that she did not particularly mind it. Are you going to go, she asked, to the next one? He looked up from the notebook. He had the expression she had come to think of as his actual face, not the diplomatic, careful listening expression, or the focused technical expression, but the one he had when nobody was watching him be anything, which she had increasingly become someone he forgot to perform for. Are you asking whether I'm going to leave? He said. She did not answer, but she did not look away either. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, I came here because it seemed important. That part turned out to be true, and then it turned out that some other things were also important in ways I hadn't planned on. He looked at the notebook, then back at her. I don't know what the right answer is, but I don't think the right answer is the same as the convenient answer. Those are two different things, she said. Yes. She thought about this. She thought about what it would look like, the next engagement, the next contested corridor, the next FETS quorum. She thought about the 47 members of the network, now being trained by Marsh's documentation, expanding into a structural methodology. She thought about the fact that she was a combat commander with a gift for adverse conditions, and about the fact that he was a builder with a gift for making things work, and about the fact that those were not actually the same gift, but were, it had turned out, substantially compatible ones. You should go, she said. He blinked. To the next one, she said. But not alone. Your methodology is sound, but you nearly died in the outer ring because you didn't tell me about the network in time for me to help you protect it. You need someone who can read tactical situations. He was quiet for a moment, processing this. Are you volunteering? I'm the commander of the 3rd Orbital Fleet. I have clearances you don't have. I have operational experience you don't have. I have contacts in 17 different military structures. She paused. And I have worked with you for 14 months, which means I know how you think, which is the operational advantage that takes the most time to develop. He looked at her for a long moment, the same direct, open attention, calculating in his particular way not what this would cost him but whether it was the right thing. There's a resource conflict in the outer Meridian systems, he said. 3 factions, long history. Nobody has proposed formal mediation because nobody believed formal mediation was possible. Have they been told it's possible? Not yet. Then that's the starting point. He almost smiled, the real one, not the diplomatic one. You sound like me. Don't push it. He opened his notebook to a fresh page. She looked over his shoulder as he started writing. His handwriting was still illegible to her in human script, but he always translated the key points aloud as he wrote. For no reason she had been able to identify except that he found it useful to hear things in 2 languages when he was working. The stars outside the corridor viewport were the same ones, still patient, still there. They had a lot of work left to do.